These weeks we've been focusing on decision making and the role of prayer in how we make decisions. Instead of just running off and trying to do something, even for God, that we think God might want us to do. We should always pray. Prayer should always be the first work that we do. And last week, we kind of gotten into the series a little bit on prayer, and I gave a message on 4 basic principles on how to pray. First one is you ought to show respect to God when you go and talk to Him, right? He taught us the prayer, the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. He's holy. So we ought to show Him some respect. He's not our buddy. We don't talk to the big guy in heaven. We ought to show some respect to God when we address Him. Holy Father, our Father. Secondly, we talked about the enemies of prayer. Self-centeredness, self-reliance. Those are enemies of prayer. Then we talked about how when you go to God and you talk to Him, you ought to be specific. Don't pray these prayers of bless the world. Well, what's that? What does that mean, bless the world? Be specific. The Bible says He already knows what we're thinking about before we pray, so we ought to be honest with Him and just be specific. What do we want? What do we need? Talk to Him about that. And then finally, don't complicate it. Prayer is basically conversation with God. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. It is talking to God. It's opening up the conversation with Him. I was speaking to someone the other day who told me that he thinks God might be working in his life. And I said, you ought to open up the conversation with God. You ought to talk to Him. Well, today I want to unpack a biblical example of someone who actually put much of this into practice. His name is Nehemiah, and you're going to see from the fact that he prayed about everything that he was very successful, had a great impact, but always making sure that along the way he was having conversation with God. But first, let me, before I get into the study of what he did, I want us to get a little background on this historical book called Nehemiah. Nehemiah's story takes place around 445 BC, 445 years before Christ, during the beginning of what the Persian Empire was. And you'll know that the Persian Empire, most of us know, would be modern day what? It would be modern day Iran. That was called Persia. And some of you remember back in 1979, for those of you who are old enough, you remember that scene. It was on our television. I remember CNN reporting it. The Shah of Iran was forced to leave the capital, Tehran, and they showed him at the international airport about to board a plane to come to the United States. But before he did that, if you remember, he knelt down on the ground and he kissed the soil. And then he got up from his knees and he said this: a 2,000-year-old monarchy has now come to an end. What was he referring to? Well, he was referring to a monarchy that was 2,000 years old, that goes all the way back to the Persian Empire and the time of Nehemiah. Now, the Jews had been living in Persia for some time. You remember that Israel's history involved a monarchy too. They had the kingdom of Saul, he was the first king, and then you had King David, and then you had King Solomon, and after Solomon died, there was a problem with his sons, and the monarchy split into 2 kingdoms. You had the northern kingdom called Israel, and then you had the southern kingdom called Judah. The northern kingdom was overtaken in 722 BC by the Assyrians, and the Jews were scattered, never to return. They're called the lost tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom, however, fell much later, 140 years later, to the Babylonians. And the Babylonians, their philosophy was when they overtook a people, they took them captive and brought them back to Babylon. And so that's what they do. They plucked out the king's eyes. They took many of the best families there and the young men, and they took them into exile into Babylon. Now, when the Persians come to power in 539 BC, they conquer the Babylonians. Their philosophy is, when we conquer a people, we don't bring them to our country, we let them stay there and we govern them from there, much like the Roman Empire did. So when the Persians came to power, they allowed Jews to go back to Jerusalem, to go back to their homeland if they wanted to. The first group went back to Jerusalem under the leadership of a man named Zerubbabel. The second group returned under the leadership of a priest called Ezra. There's a book in the Bible that's by his name. And now a third group is about to go back to Jerusalem, this time to rebuild the outer walls. And the man who's going to lead them is Nehemiah. Nehemiah is going to make an incredible impact and is one of the great leaders of the Bible, but you're going to see all the way through his leadership, he prays. He's constantly having communication with God about everything. The first thing I want you to notice is how Nehemiah gets in proximity of a need, and as a result, God puts a great burden on his heart. Chapter 1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hekeliah, in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men. And I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. And they said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Nehemiah is a Jew. He's one of the exile captives living in the Persian palace in Susa. And the text tells us that Nehemiah's job is he's the cupbearer to the king. You know what the cupbearer was? The cupbearer was a human guinea pig. There was so much assassination of the rulers that they had to have somebody who was called a cupbearer who would actually drink the wine, drink the cup before it got to the king to make sure it wasn't poison. So it's pretty clear here by Nehemiah's position that the king trusted no one better than Nehemiah. Now, one of Nehemiah's siblings, his brother, Hanani, comes from Jerusalem with an entourage of friends, and he's in a conference with them when Nehemiah asks him a question. He says, how are my people doing in the city of Jerusalem? And they answer him immediately. They say, Nehemiah, I'm afraid we got some bad news. The walls of Jerusalem, the walls were so important. They protected a city. If you didn't have walls around your city, you were susceptible to any kind of siege at any time. So you had to have walls. That's why if you ever go overseas, you go to Europe and you'll go to cities, you'll see they have walls that maybe are still there to protect the city. They tell them bad news. The walls of Jerusalem are broken down or in shambles, and the gates of these walls are burned with fire. In other words, the outer protection of Jerusalem is absolutely gone. There is no one in the city who can put their head down at night and sleep without the fear of an onslaught or another tyrannical ruler coming in to defeat them. So they're unprotected. The walls have been destroyed. Now, what's Nehemiah's response to that? Does he run off and start to make plans? No, it says, first of all, he's very burdened by what he hears. I believe there's a principle here. If you're going to make any kind of impact in life, it usually begins when you're burdened by something. And in order for you to be burdened by something, you have to be exposed to a need. Before you can do anything useful for God, You've got to get in proximity of a need so you feel a burden for it. One writer has put it this way: you'll never lighten anyone's load until you feel the pressure in your soul. You'll never lighten any load until you feel the pressure in your own soul. And I'll never forget, this has happened to me several times. I'll never forget a project I had to do once in seminary. In seminary, one of my professors gave us a project. He said, the seminary was in Nyack, New York, right outside of New York City. And of course, I grew up there, worked in New York City for many years. So I knew New York City well, and I knew the three ministries I wanted to visit. The first one was a street mission in the Bowery. The Bowery is in Lower Manhattan. Everybody knows the Bowery, at least years ago. That was the place where all the street people used to be, and the drunks and all the people that were struggling were in the Bowery. And so they set up a mission there. It was an incredible ministry. Went back all the way to the late 1800s. And men and women of God served there. They were humble servants who served these street people. The second ministry that I visited was a very unique ministry called the Lambs Club. And what it was the Church of the Nazarene denomination went into New York City, and they bought a theater, an off-Broadway theater. They brought a restaurant right next to it, and they brought the offices up top. And during the week, the church had its offices and conducted ministry there. On certain nights, they would have family-centered plays, professional actors at the off-Broadway theater called the Lambs Club, and then they had a restaurant. The wonderful, beautiful, well-done restaurant. It was a very unique ministry. And I went there and I met with the pastor, and he told me about all that God was doing and how they met there as a church. They had a church community there every Sunday in New York City. Really unique way of doing ministry. But the third ministry was the one that had the most impact on me, and that was Covenant House. In the late 1800s, when Dr. A.B. Simpson, who was a Presbyterian pastor who started the Alliance movement of churches, he bought land in New York City, right in Midtown. Yes, he had entrepreneurs that caught his vision to reach the masses of immigrants that were coming into New York City. And so they bought land near Times Square. And on 41st Street, they put up a building, and they had widows in there. They had missionary training in there, all kinds of work and ministry they would have in these buildings. But they sold it eventually when the Alliance moved from New York City, its headquarters, to Nyack, New York, out in the suburbs. And one of the buildings they sold was to the Catholic Church, and it's called Covenant House. Now, Covenant House was started by a Franciscan priest by the name of Father Bruce Ritter. And Father Ritter was a professor at Manhattan College as well, and he was constantly writing articles and making speeches on the inner city. And one day, a young student from Pace University stood up, and he asked Father Ritter a question. He says, "What are you doing personally to solve all the problems of the inner city?" And Father Ritter said, "It caught me off guard, but I managed to give some sort of vague response. But the question kept haunting me. What am I doing? What am I doing about the problem?" And finally, he said, the answer came to me. I'm talking about it. I'm writing about it. And so he started taking in some child prostitutes that were in his neighborhood that were controlled by pimps. And he started to take them into his rectory. And then he bought a building, and he would house them, and he would give them medical attention. And the ministry just grew and grew and grew all the way till today, where there are covenant houses in 34 cities in the United States that are open 24/7 for any runaways, any child prostitutes, anybody that needed protection from their pimps. And so I toured the original Covenant House in New York City, and it went like this. I went through the door, and they frisked me right away, and they frisked me for weapons because the pimps try and get back in and grab their child prostitutes. The first floor they sent me to, it was just a floor. It was like a hospital full of unwed mothers, some as young as 12, 13, 14-year-old girls that were about to give birth to babies because of their prostitution. Second floor, people suffering from all kinds of venereal disease, their bodies full of sores and embarrassed by this disease, another hospital-like atmosphere. Third floor, I'll never forget it. It was like a sea of cubicles. As far as you can see, rows and rows and rows of cubicles for counseling these battered children. 66% of the child prostitutes at Covenant House were boys, male prostitutes from the streets of New York City. And so this building, 8 floors high, was packed, and there was even a waiting list in some cases. As I'm touring this thing, and it's an incredible ministry, I'm thinking, like, what would cause someone to build this thing? How did they get the vision for it? And the answer is Bruce Ritter got within proximity of an awful need, and God placed a burden on his heart to do something about it. You will never lighten a load until you feel the pressure in your soul. Well, again, what does Nehemiah do with this? He's feeling the pressure. He brings it to God, chapter 1. Brings the need to God. When I heard these things, I sat down and I wept, and for some days I mourned and I fasted and I prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to the prayer, to hear the prayer of your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you, Lord. Let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was the cupbearer to the king. What's happening here? Nehemiah is burdened by the great need of his people in Jerusalem, so he prays and he brings it to God and he says, Lord, what should I do? And he says in this prayer, I'm about to approach the king. I'm going to go to the king for help, and I need your help, Lord, as I do that. Again, he doesn't make a plan first. He prays first. And he basically says, God, my plan is to somehow approach the king, but I don't know what to ask for, so please show me. And God does show him that. He brings his need to the king. And did you notice that in his prayer, he expects God to give him success? He asks that, and he says, Lord, I'm praying that you will grant me success and give me the direction of what I'm going to need to ask for. You know, James in his little epistle says the same thing. When we approach God and we ask him for wisdom and we ask him for guidance and we ask him for something, we should expect God to answer. We should expect success. James chapter 1 says this, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives how? Generously to all without finding fault, and it'll be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all we do. You understand what he's saying? He's saying when you go to God, you better determine before you start asking God whether he's worthy of your trust and whether you believe that he can deliver. Don't be a double-minded person. Well, Lord, I'm asking this, but I'm not sure you can do this. You should go with confidence and with faith that God won't make fun of you for asking anything of him. But he'll take your request seriously. And we said last week, the answer is one of 4 ways. It's always the best answer, by the way. Whatever he answers us is for our best. Yes, no, wait, or I have a better idea. Those are the 4 ways that God answers our prayer. But you should go to God expecting God to do something. I have a pastor who was telling me that he was recently in Western Pennsylvania. The Alliance has a lot of churches in California and a lot of churches in Western Pennsylvania. But they're small. And so he went to this small church in Western Pennsylvania, and he said that during the announcement time, I kept hearing about this group, the Goners. The Goners. And finally, the Goners are going to meet on Thursday night. And finally, he said, I cornered the pastor, and I asked him, who are the Goners? And he goes, well, the Goners, they're a bunch of older ladies now. They didn't start out older ladies. They've been around a long time. But most of the group now are elderly women. And they meet weekly. And they'll pray for everybody, but especially for people who are far from God. And the reputation of this group is, if you get on their list, you're a goner. So they call themselves the Goners. You know what? I think they expect God to deliver. Yeah. So, feels the burden, brings the need to God. Next thing is, at some point he began to devise a plan. He's ready with a plan. He's already thought all of it through, and he's considered options. So when the king says, what do you want me to do for you? He's ready. Nehemiah chapter 2. The king said to me, what do you want? So I prayed to the God of heaven. Notice again, what does he do? Just takes a few seconds. But again, he says, Lord, I'm about to answer the king. Help me here. I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, let him send me to the city in Jerusalem, in Judah, where my ancestors are buried, so I can rebuild it. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take, and when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of the Euphrates, so that they'll provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he'll give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my request. What does Nehemiah do? He always prays before, but he's ready. He's thought through. He's got options. He's got a plan. And when the king says, what do you want? He says, I need this and I need that. And I'm going to rebuild this first, and these are the materials I'm going to need, and this is what I'm going to need from you, king. You've heard the old expression, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That is very true. There's nothing unspiritual about planning. Even the Lord's work, nothing unspiritual about that. Assuming what? You've prayed ahead of time. You've asked for his provision. You asked for success. He's ready. When the king wants to know, what is your plan? Nehemiah's got a plan. And then finally, the final step in Nehemiah's process here is he reminds the people, God will fight on our behalf. In other words, the pressure is not us to make this thing happen. God is going to deliver. He's going to fight our battles. He'll bring success. Was the opposition fierce against Nehemiah and the Jews? Absolutely. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, and the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod, lots of people involved here opposing, heard that the repairs to Jerusalem walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to stir up trouble against it. Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families, and with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember, the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families and your sons and daughters and your wives and homes. Whenever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. See, when you start out work for the Lord, when you start out a ministry, there's usually not much opposition in the beginning, and there's good reason for that. You don't face opposition because you're not a success yet, right? You're not making any kind of an impact. But wait until you start the ministry. Wait until you start putting up walls and things start to click and you make some progress, and the ministry starts to have impact on people and results start to happen. What happens then? Well, we do have an enemy called the devil, and he starts to show up, and opposition starts to happen, and things get complicated, and people get discouraged, right? Where is the pressure coming from on Nehemiah? Well, it's coming from pagan nations who want the Jews out of Jerusalem, but that's not really the greatest opposition here. The toughest problem for Nehemiah is within the camp, right? The people themselves, they're ready to give up. Chapter 4. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. So much rubble. We can't rebuild the wall. And our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we'll be right there among them. We'll kill them and put an end to the work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they're going to attack us. Fear, discouragement, worry. That's from within the camp. What does God say about discouragement in the Bible? You know what he says about discouragement in the Bible? Get rid of it. The God of the Bible is not the God of all discouragement. He's the God of what? All encouragement. If you're being weighed down this morning and you're discouraged, I hope you understand that's your choice. You can choose that. And I don't care how much I tell you God's promises. I don't care how much I pump you up from what God says in his word about how great he is and how much he's at your side. If you want to be discouraged, you'll stay discouraged. Why? Because discouragement is a choice you make. It's a choice you make. God has already given us everything for life and godliness, it says in the Bible. We have incredible promises. I'll take away your guilt. I'll take away your bitterness. I'll take away your past. You won't have to worry about your past. I will forgive all of it. I'll give you a clean slate. I'll empower you with my spirit so you can say no to any bad habit or sinful ways. You got all these great promises, but I've been a pastor for over 40 years. I know this to be true. You can write it out on a wall. You can draw pictures to people. This is what God promises that he's going to do in your life. But if you want to camp out in discouragement, you can choose to do that. Discouragement is always a choice. Well, and Pastor, what am I supposed to do? You got to resist it. You got to resist the discouragement. I know it's going to be there, but you got to resist it. And you instead, here's a new idea, trust God. Live in his promises. Hebrews chapter 12. Don't be afraid, for I'm with, Isaiah. Don't be afraid, for I'm with you. Don't be discouraged, God says, for I'm your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will hold you up by my victorious right hand. Next verse. So let's not get tired of doing what's good. Just at the right time, we'll reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. D.L. Moody said this, I've never known God to use a discouraged person. Why? Because it's the opposite of faith, right? It's the total opposite of faith. A discouraged person is looking at what? their problem and their circumstances rather than fixing their eyes on Jesus. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything that life is going to be easy. But what I'm saying is, Christian, you can choose to go through life looking at your problems, looking at the things that discourage you, or you can choose to obey what God says to do. Get your eyes off the problems and onto me. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Hebrews, let's look at that one. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer, the perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He scorned its shame. He sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you won't grow weary and lose heart. Do we have that 2 Corinthians verse? Therefore, we do not lose heart, though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes, this is very important, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. That's saying, as long as you're going to keep your eyes focused on problems of what's in front of you right now, instead of lifting your eyes above that and keeping your eyes focused on God and what he has promised you in his word, you're going to struggle. And Paul says, I can do this because compared to this, when I compare whatever struggles I'm going through right now, compared to the eternal rewards of fixing your eyes on God and walking by faith, it's not even a comparison. Romans, same thing. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Let me try and give you an example of how this might be clarified for you. It's kind of a goofy example, but let me try and paint it for you, what the Apostle Paul's trying to say. Let's just suppose yesterday, August 30th, 2025, you had an absolutely horrendous day. You get a toothache all of a sudden, and you go to the dentist, and they tell you you need a root canal, but the problem is they've run out of anesthesia. You crash your car on the way home. You get home, and you look at your stock portfolio on the computer, and it's all taken a nosedive. Your best friend betrays you. You have all this bad thing happen to you yesterday. But then from the next day on, August 31st on, absolutely terrific through the end of the year. A friend of yours wins the Wisconsin lottery and gives you $10 million. You get promoted at work to your dream job that you've always wanted. The Post-Crescent puts your picture on the front as the Fox Cities Person of the Year. The Packers, the Brewers, the Bucks all win championships. You get a chance to play golf at Butamore Country Club with Tiger Woods, and you beat him. Your marriage is great. Your health is the best it's ever been right through the end of the year. So somebody on January 1st of 2026 asks you, hey, how was 2025 to you? How was that year? What's going to be your response? It was fantastic. Wait a minute. I remember you complaining about something you told me on August 30th. You had this awful day. Oh, yeah, that's right. But compared to the rest of the year, it was nothing. I don't even think about that. That's exactly what the Apostle Paul is saying. When you look at the struggles or the obstacles or the problems we got now compared to all the promises of God, not just in eternity, but now, if we'll focus our eyes on him, doesn't even compare. Doesn't compare. It was all worth enduring. So, Christian, don't get discouraged. Get your eyes off the problem and onto Jesus. Listen to the words of Nehemiah. Don't be afraid. Remember, the Lord is great and awesome. He'll fight for you. He'll fight for your sons and your daughters and your family and your home. Our God will always fight for us. Yeah. Let's stand for closing prayer. Lord, it is so easy to keep our eyes on the things of this world and the challenges in front of us instead of living in your promises. And yet that's what you told us to do. You told us we're going to have trouble on this earth. You told us we're going to go through many struggles. But you also told us to get our eyes off of those things and onto you. And the Christian life is a life of faith. The whole thing is an adventure of faith walking. And I pray this morning we've been reminded of that. And Lord, your promises, wow, they're amazing. Make us people who study your word. And when we see a promise, what Spurgeon called the wills and the shalls of the Bible, oh, I pray we'll underline those and grab onto them and say, this is a promise. You're going to do this in my life. Oh, God, I pray we'll be people of faith from this moment on. Now may our Lord Jesus Christ himself and God our Father, who loved us and by his grace has given us eternal encouragement and good hope, may he encourage your hearts and strengthen you for every good deed and word. And God's people said, amen.